One of the biggest mistakes gardeners make today is relying entirely on lab tests or pH meters to understand their soil. These tools have their place, but they often create a false sense of precision. The truth is, your hands and experience tell you far more about soil health and texture than a lab sheet ever will. I've worked with raised beds, backyard plots, and even hydroponic systems, and in every case, understanding soil by touch and feel transforms planting success. Misjudging texture leads to compaction, poor drainage, uneven nutrient uptake, and ultimately weaker plants. Experienced gardeners knew that soil was a living system, and they trusted their senses to judge it. You can learn soil texture by feeling it between your fingers. Older gardeners would pinch a small handful of soil, moisten it slightly, and press it into a ball. If the ball held together but crumbled easily when poked, it was a loam ideal for most crops. If it felt gritty and refused to form a ball, it was sandy soil, which drains too quickly and may require organic matter. If it stuck together, felt heavy, and was slow to crumble, it was clay-rich in nutrients but prone to compaction. I've done this in raised beds, and by adjusting amendments according to feel rather than lab numbers, I've consistently grown healthier, more vigorous vegetables. Even hydroponic growers benefit when incorporating soil or compost into media beds. Knowing the texture by touch informs water retention adjustments. Moisture retention is revealed by hand pressure. When you squeeze a ball of moist soil, the way it responds tells you its water-holding capacity. In sandy soil, water drains rapidly and the ball collapses easily. In clay, it stays wet and sticky. Loam strikes the perfect balance, holding enough moisture without suffocating roots. I've found that adjusting watering schedules according to this tactile feedback produces far better germination and seedling growth than simply following a calendar or relying on irrigation meters. In raised beds, squeezing the soil weekly gives me a direct, actionable sense of whether crops need water. The ribbon test shows soil composition accurately in the field. Older gardeners used a simple ribbon test. Take a small amount of moist soil and roll it between your thumb and forefinger to form a ribbon. Sandy soils break immediately, silty soils form a short, soft ribbon, and clay soils form long, stiff ribbons. In my experience, combining this test with observation of how soil crumbles or sticks provides a very accurate sense of texture. For raised beds, I adjust amendments based on the results. Compost to improve sandy beds, sand or grit to loosen clay, and nothing for balanced loam. Even in hydroponic setups that incorporate some soil media, this tactile approach ensures uniform water and nutrient retention. Observation of soil color and smell complements tactile tests. Older gardeners understood that soil is more than sand, silt, and clay. Dark soils indicate organic matter and microbial activity, while pale soils may be nutrient poor. A healthy soil should smell earthy, not sour or rotten. I've worked with several backyard beds where the lab analysis suggested adequate fertility, but the soil felt hard and compacted. By adding compost and observing changes in texture and smell over weeks, plant growth improved dramatically. The lesson is that texture, structure, and biological activity are interconnected, and hands-on observation is the fastest way to assess them. Soil behavior under moisture extremes, really reveals hidden issues. Experienced gardeners would watch how soil responds to rain or irrigation. Sandy soil dries and warms quickly, but, honestly, may not support heavy crops without frequent watering. Clay stays wet and is slow to warm, which can lead to root stress if crops are planted too early. Loam, on the other hand, manages both extremes well. I test my raised beds by watering a small section heavily and seeing how water penetrates. If water pools or runs off, amendments are needed. These observations are far more reliable than any chart or lab test because they account for local microclimates, compaction, and drainage patterns. Plant performance, in fact, confirms your tactile assessments. Older gardeners didn't stop at touch. They watched how crops responded. Healthy growth, deep roots, and consistent yields indicate soil texture is appropriate. slow emergent, stunted roots, or leaf yellowing often point to compaction, poor drainage, or imbalance. I've used hand-based assessments combined with early crop monitoring to make mid-season amendments, loosen soil, add compost or mulch, to correct texture issues before they compromise yields. Hydroponic growers can adapt this approach by assessing media compaction, drainage, and root behavior in trays or channels. Mixing and amending soil based on feel honestly saves time and resources. Instead of over-relying on tests, older gardeners would mix in sand, compost, or organic matter as needed. I test a handful of soil, note whether it crumbles, sticks, or drains too fast, and amend accordingly. Sandy beds receive generous compost additions, clay beds get sand and grit, and loam beds often only need minimal organic matter to maintain fertility. Over-applying amendments without this tactile feedback can disrupt soil balance and create inconsistent growing conditions. Soil texture changes with seasons, and hands-on testing catches it early. In raised beds, repeated watering, crop removal, and compaction from foot traffic can alter texture over time. I check my beds monthly by hand, adjusting mulching, adding organic matter, or loosening compacted areas before planting. Seasonal checks in hydroponic media also allow me to adjust substrate mixes, preventing root crowding or waterlogging. Older gardeners' new texture was dynamic, and they adjusted proactively rather than reacting after plant stress occurred. The tactile approach builds intuition for planting and irrigation. By working directly with soil, older gardeners developed an intuitive sense of when to plant, how deeply and how much water to apply. I've found that knowing how the soil feels allows for precise seed placement, correct depth for transplants, and appropriate irrigation, sometimes requiring less water than a schedule would suggest. Raised beds, backyard gardens, and even soil-based hydroponics all benefit from this hands-on experience. Soil texture matters more than perfect lab numbers. Tests provide data, but texture determines root growth, aeration, drainage, and water retention in ways that numbers alone cannot capture. I've grown identical crops in soils with the same pH and nutrient content but different textures. The loam-based soil produced consistent, vigorous crops, while clay-heavy soil struggled, despite appearing ideal on paper. Older gardeners understood this difference, and they trusted touch over tests. The lesson is that understanding soil by hand builds better gardens. Soil is a living ecosystem, and texture governs how plants interact with water, nutrients, and microbes. Learning to judge soil by feel, ribbon length, moisture retention, and response to pressure allows gardeners to adjust early, amend wisely, and plant with confidence. Raised beds, small backyard plots, and hydroponic systems all benefit when gardeners take the time to know their soil intimately. If you want stronger roots, healthier crops, and fewer surprises in your garden, start feeling your soil, not just reading lab results. Press it, roll it, squeeze it, and learn its language. Adjust amendments based on your observations, and watch your garden respond with vigor and resilience. If you found this hands-on, experience-driven approach useful, do consider subscribing to Easy Garden Life. Share this video with other gardeners who want to grow smarter, not just follow charts or app recommendations. Knowing your soil by hand is one of the oldest and most effective tools in gardening, and it works every time.